The Duke of Ashworth stood at his bedroom window and watched the rain fall on his empty gardens. His wife had loved those gardens once. Now they grew wild without her care. 3 years had passed since Margaret died. 3 years since he locked his heart away and promised never to open it again. Alexander Hartwell was only 30 years old, but he felt ancient. His dark hair showed no grey yet, but his eyes held the weight of a much older man. He was a duke with more money than he could count, more land than he could ride across in a week, and more loneliness than any human should bear. "Your Grace, will you come down for dinner?" his butler asked from the doorway. "No, Harrison, I will take it in my study tonight." "Very well, Your Grace." Alexander did not eat much these days. Food had no taste. Wine brought no comfort. He spent his nights in the library surrounded by books he could not read, staring at pages until dawn came. Across London, in a house much smaller and darker, Eleanor Westbrook tried to make herself invisible. Her stepmother, Lady Cordelia, swept through the morning room like a cold wind. Eleanor kept her eyes down and her hands folded. "Look at you," Cordelia said with disgust in her voice. 26 years old and still unmarried. Do you know what people call you? They call you a burden. They call you the old maid Westbrook girl. Eleanor felt her cheeks burn, but she said nothing. Words only made things worse. "Your father left debts when he died," Cordelia continued. "Debts I have paid. Debts that should have been your dowry. But who would marry you now? You are too old, too plain, too poor." Eleanor's 2 stepsisters giggled behind their fans. They were younger, prettier, and cruel. They had learned their mother's ways well. "I am sorry, Mother," Eleanor said quietly. She had learned to call Cordelia mother, even though the word tasted like poison. "Sorry does not feed you or clothe you," Cordelia snapped. "Sorry does not erase the shame of having an unwanted stepdaughter eating my food and taking up space in my house." After Cordelia left, Eleanor went to her small room in the attic. It was cold in winter and hot in summer. The bed was narrow and the blanket thin, but it was hers. Here alone, she could let the tears fall. She pulled out a small book from under her mattress. It was a book of poetry her real mother had given her before she died. Eleanor traced her mother's handwriting on the inside cover. "To my dearest Eleanor, you are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, loved more than you can imagine." Eleanor held the book to her chest and tried to remember being loved. It had been so long, 10 years since her mother died. 10 years of living with people who hated her. 10 years of being told she was worthless. But deep inside, in a place Cordelia could not reach, Eleanor still believed there might be something more. She still believed in kindness, even though she rarely saw it. She still believed in love, even though it seemed impossible for her. Meanwhile, the Duke of Ashworth sat in his massive library and tried to remember what happiness felt like. The room was beautiful, with tall shelves of books reaching to the ceiling, but Alexander saw none of it. He saw only Margaret's empty chair by the fire. He heard only silence where her laughter used to ring. "You must move forward, Alexander," his mother had told him last week. "Margaret would not want you to live like this." But how could he move forward? Margaret had been his childhood friend, his chosen bride, his gentle companion. Losing her to fever had torn something inside him that would not heal. He had held her hand as she died. He had made her a promise. "I will never love another," he had whispered. "You are my only love," and he had kept that promise. He went through the motions of living. He managed his estates. He attended Parliament when required, but his heart stayed locked away, buried with Margaret in the cold ground. His mother worried. His friends tried to draw him out, But Alexander built walls around himself that no one could breach. He was polite but distant, kind but cold, present but absent. "Your Grace," Harrison interrupted his thoughts, "the Countess of Bramwell is here to see you." Alexander sighed. Lady Cordelia Westbrook, now Countess of Bramwell after remarrying, was persistent. She had some business proposition she wanted to discuss. He had refused her twice, but she kept returning. "Show her in," he said tiredly. Lady Cordelia swept into the library with the confidence of a woman who knew her own worth. She was handsome in a cold way, with sharp features and calculating eyes. She curtsied properly and smiled. "Your Grace, how kind of you to receive me. What can I do for you, Lady Bramwell?" Alexander asked without warmth. "I come with a proposition that will benefit us both," she said, settling into a chair without being invited. "You need a hostess for your homes, someone to manage your household and represent you in society. I need to settle a debt of honor regarding my late husband's daughter." Alexander raised an eyebrow. "I am listening." "My stepdaughter, Eleanor Westbrook, is 26 and unmarried. She is educated, well-mannered, and capable. She could serve as your housekeeper or companion. In exchange, I would forgive a debt your late father owed mine, £20,000. Alexander knew nothing of such a debt, but his father had made many business arrangements before dying. He studied Lady Bramwell's face and saw calculation there, not concern for a stepdaughter. "Why would you send your stepdaughter into service?" he asked carefully. "She has no prospects for marriage. I have done my duty by her for 10 years since her father's death. It is time she earned her own way. She is sensible and plain. She will not cause trouble." Something in her tone bothered Alexander. He heard contempt beneath the polite words. He thought of his own sister, how he would never speak of her this way. "I will consider it," he said. "Send the girl to me tomorrow at 10. I will interview her myself." Lady Bramwell smiled triumphantly. "You are most generous, Your Grace." After she left, Alexander stood at the window again and wondered what he had just agreed to. He did not need a housekeeper. Mrs. Peterson managed his household perfectly. He did not need a companion. He needed nothing and no one. But something pulled at him. Maybe it was the way Lady Bramwell had called her stepdaughter plain, with such satisfaction. Maybe it was the mention of a debt. Maybe it was just that the empty library felt too quiet tonight. Eleanor could not believe what Cordelia had done. She stood in her attic room and tried not to shake. Cordelia had sold her like furniture to pay a debt. "You should be grateful," Cordelia had said coldly. "The Duke of Ashworth is wealthy and respected. You will have food and shelter. What more could someone like you want?" "But mother, I thought..." "You thought what? That some gentleman would marry you? Look at yourself, Eleanor. You have nothing. You are nothing. Be grateful the Duke is willing to take you on." Now Eleanor packed her few belongings into a small trunk. 2 dresses, both old and faded, her mother's book of poetry, a few undergarments, a brush that had lost half its bristles. This was everything she owned in the world. Her stepsisters came to her door to watch her pack. They whispered and giggled. Eleanor ignored them. She had learned long ago that showing pain only encouraged them. "Maybe the Duke will fall in love with you," one said mockingly. "Maybe you will become a duchess." The other laughed. "Can you imagine Eleanor as a duchess? She can barely manage to dress herself properly." Eleanor folded her clothes carefully and said nothing. Inside, her heart ached. She had dreamed once of love and marriage. She had dreamed of children and a home of her own. But those dreams had faded year by year as she grew older and poorer and more isolated. Now she would be a servant in a stranger's house. It was better than staying here, she told herself. It had to be better. That night, Eleanor could not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed and tried to imagine what the Duke of Ashworth would be like. She had heard of him, of course. Everyone had heard of the Duke of Ashworth. He was young, wealthy, and tragically widowed. Society ladies whispered about him at parties. Eleanor never attended. Some said he was handsome but cold. Others said he was kind but distant. All agreed he was broken by grief and would never love again. Eleanor understood grief. She had lost her mother, then her father, then any hope of normal life. Maybe she and the Duke would understand each other's sadness. Maybe he would be kind to her. Or maybe he would be cruel like Cordelia. Maybe this would be even worse than her current life. Eleanor pulled her thin blanket up to her chin and tried not to cry. Crying changed nothing. It never had. The next morning, Eleanor dressed in her best gown. It was 5 years old and had been mended many times, but it was clean. She brushed her brown hair until it shone and pinned it up neatly. She looked at herself in the cracked mirror and tried to see what others saw. Plain, Cordelia always said. Ordinary, forgettable. Eleanor saw a thin woman with sad eyes and careful movements. She saw someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. "The carriage is ready," Cordelia announced from the doorway. She looked at Eleanor with satisfaction. "Remember to be grateful, Eleanor. Remember that you are lucky the Duke is willing to take you." "Yes, Mother," Eleanor said quietly. The ride to the Duke's London townhouse took only 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. Eleanor watched the streets change from shabby to elegant. The houses grew larger and more beautiful. She felt smaller with each block. When the carriage stopped, Eleanor saw the most magnificent house she had ever seen. It was 4 stories of white stone with tall windows and black iron railings. Servants in fine livery stood at attention. Everything gleamed with wealth and care. Eleanor climbed down from the carriage with shaking legs. A butler with kind eyes opened the door for her. "Miss Westbrook?" he asked gently. "Yes, sir. I am Harrison, His Grace's butler. Please follow me. The Duke is expecting you in the library." Eleanor followed Harrison through an entrance hall that made her gasp. The floor was polished marble. A grand staircase curved upward. Portraits of noble ancestors looked down from the walls. Everything spoke of generations of wealth and power. She felt her worn dress and scuffed shoes like weights. She did not belong here. She would never belong here. Harrison led her down a hallway and stopped at a tall wooden door. He knocked softly. "Miss Westbrook, Your Grace," he announced, then stepped aside for Eleanor to enter. Eleanor walked into the library and forgot to breathe. The room was enormous, 2 stories high, with shelves of books covering every wall. A fire crackled in a huge fireplace. Comfortable chairs were arranged near the warmth. It was the most beautiful room she had ever seen. Then she saw him. The Duke of Ashworth stood by the window with his back to her. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothes that spoke of quiet wealth. His dark hair was slightly too long, touching his collar. He stood very still, as if he had been standing there for hours. "Your Grace," Eleanor said softly, curtsying, as she had been taught long ago. He turned to face her. Eleanor had expected coldness or cruelty. She had prepared herself for disdain or indifference. But when the Duke looked at her, she saw only deep, endless sadness. His eyes were dark grey, almost black, and they held such pain that her heart ached for him. He was handsome, she realized, not in a cheerful, easy way, but in the way of carved stone or winter landscapes. Beautiful but untouchable. "Miss Westbrook," he said. His voice was low and rough, as if he did not use it often. "Please, sit down." Eleanor sat on the edge of a chair near the fire. The Duke remained standing, studying her with those sad eyes. She forced herself to meet his gaze, even though everything in her wanted to look away. "Lady Bramwell says you need a position," he said finally. "Yes, Your Grace. She says you are educated and capable. I try to be useful, Your Grace. She also says you are plain and have no prospects for marriage." Eleanor felt her face burn with shame, but she kept her voice steady. "That is true, Your Grace." Something flickered in the Duke's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect. He had expected her to deny it or make excuses. "I do not actually need a housekeeper," he said. "Mrs. Peterson manages my household very well. I do not need a companion. I prefer solitude." Eleanor's heart sank. He was going to refuse her. She would have to return to Cordelia's house in shame. However, the Duke continued, "I find myself bothered by the way your stepmother spoke of you. No one should be described as she described you." He moved closer and sat in the chair, across from Eleanor. For the first time she saw his face clearly in the firelight. There were shadows under his eyes, lines of grief around his mouth. He looked like a man who had not slept properly in years. "Tell me honestly, Miss Westbrook," he said quietly, "are you happy in your stepmother's house?" Eleanor opened her mouth to lie, to say the proper thing, but something in his eyes stopped her. He was asking a real question. He wanted a real answer. "No, Your Grace," she whispered. "I am not happy there." "Are they cruel to you?" Eleanor hesitated. "They do not strike me, Your Grace, but words can hurt too." The Duke nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "words can hurt very much indeed." They sat in silence for a moment. The fire crackled. Rain began to fall outside the tall windows. Eleanor felt something strange happening. She felt seen. For the first time in years, someone was actually looking at her and seeing a real person. "I will offer you a position," the Duke said finally. "Not as a housekeeper or servant, as my librarian." Eleanor blinked in surprise. "Librarian, Your Grace? I have thousands of books across my various properties. They need to be catalogued and organized. It is real work that needs doing. You will have your own rooms in this house. You will eat with the household staff. You will receive a salary of £100 per year." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. £100 was a fortune to her. It was freedom. It was possibility. "Why?" she whispered. "Why are you being so kind?" The Duke looked away, back toward the window. "Because someone was kind to me once, when I needed it most. Because I remember what it feels like to be alone and hurting. Because no one should have to live without hope." His voice cracked slightly on the last word. Eleanor saw his hands tighten on the arms of his chair. This man understood pain. He understood loneliness. They were two broken people in a broken world, trying to survive. "I accept, Your Grace," Eleanor said. Thank you so much." "Harrison will show you to your rooms," the Duke said, standing abruptly. "You may begin work tomorrow. If you need anything, ask Mrs. Peterson." He walked quickly to the door, as if he needed to escape, but he paused with his hand on the handle and looked back at her. "Welcome to Ashworth House, Miss Westbrook," he said softly. "I hope you will find some peace here." Then he was gone, leaving Eleanor alone in the beautiful library with tears streaming down her face. Harrison appeared moments later to show her to her rooms. She followed him up 2 flights of stairs to the 3rd floor. He opened a door and stepped back. Eleanor walked into a room 3 times the size of her attic space. There was a real bed with a thick mattress and clean blankets, a wardrobe for clothes, a desk by the window, a small fireplace, curtains that matched the bedspread. It was beautiful. It was more than she had ever hoped for. "Mrs. Peterson will bring you some tea," Harrison said kindly. "Dinner is at 7 in the servants' hall. We are glad to have you here, Miss Westbrook." After he left, Eleanor sat on the bed and let herself cry properly. She cried for all the years of loneliness. She cried for her lost parents and lost dreams. She cried from relief and fear and gratitude, all mixed together. Then she dried her eyes and unpacked her small trunk. She put her mother's book of poetry on the bedside table where she could see it. She hung her 2 dresses in the wardrobe where they looked lost and shabby. Tomorrow she would begin her new life. Tonight she would sleep in a real bed for the first time in years. Downstairs, Alexander sat in his study and wondered what he had done. He had not planned to hire Eleanor Westbrook. He had planned to refuse politely and send her back to her stepmother. But then he had seen her face. He had seen the fear and sadness she tried so hard to hide. He had recognized something of himself in her careful movements and quiet voice. She was someone who had learned to make herself small to avoid pain. And when he asked if she was happy, she had been honest with him. She had not lied or made excuses. She had simply told him the truth in a whisper that broke his heart. He could not send her back to that house. He could not send anyone back to cruelty when he had the power to help. Margaret would have approved, he thought. His late wife had been endlessly kind to everyone. She had believed in helping those who needed it. She would have hired Eleanor Westbrook without hesitation. Thinking of Margaret brought the familiar ache to his chest. 3 years had not lessened it. 3 years had not healed anything. He still missed her every day. He still felt guilty for surviving when she had not. "I hired someone today," he said to Margaret's portrait on his desk. "A sad young woman who needed help. I hope I did the right thing." The portrait, of course, said nothing. But Alexander thought Margaret looked approving in her painted smile. Eleanor woke the next morning to sunlight streaming through real curtains. For a moment she forgot where she was. Then memory returned, and she smiled. She was at Ashworth House. She was safe. Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper, came after breakfast to explain Eleanor's duties. She was a plump, motherly woman with grey hair and kind eyes. "His Grace wants the library catalogued," she explained. "Every book needs to be recorded with title, author, and location. It is a big job, but there is no rush. His Grace is very patient." "I will do my best," Eleanor promised. "His Grace is a good man," Mrs. Peterson said gently, "but he is very sad. His wife died 3 years ago, and he has not been the same since. He keeps to himself mostly. Do not be hurt if he does not speak much." Eleanor nodded. She understood grief. She would not expect conversation or friendship. She would do her work quietly and be grateful for this chance. She began in the London Library that very day. The room was even more beautiful in morning light. Eleanor ran her fingers along the spines of books and felt joy stir in her chest. Books had always been her friends. Books had kept her sane through lonely years. She started with the shelves nearest the fire and worked methodically. She recorded each title in the ledger. Mrs. Peterson had provided fiction, poetry, history, philosophy. The Duke had excellent taste in books. She was so absorbed in her work that she did not hear him enter. When she turned to reach for a high shelf, she gasped to find the Duke standing near the door, watching her. "I am sorry, Your Grace," she said quickly. "I did not hear you come in. I will leave if you need the library." "No," he said. "Stay. I just wanted to see how you were settling in." He looked as tired as yesterday, Eleanor thought. His clothes were perfect, but his eyes were haunted. He stood stiffly, as if he did not know what to do with his hands. "The library is magnificent, Your Grace," Eleanor said softly. "You have wonderful books. My wife chose most of them," he said. She loved to read. His voice held such pain that Eleanor's heart ached. "She had excellent taste," she said gently. The Duke nodded. He seemed about to say more, then changed his mind. "If you need anything, tell Mrs. Peterson," he said, and left quickly. Eleanor stood alone in the library and thought about the sad Duke and his dead wife. She thought about love that lasted beyond death. She thought about grief that would not heal. Days passed into weeks. Eleanor worked in the library every day. She saw the Duke occasionally, always at a distance. He would enter to retrieve a book or check on her progress. They exchanged few words, but Eleanor noticed things. She noticed that he never sat in the chair by the fire. She noticed that certain books made him pause with his hand on the spine, but never take them down. She noticed that he looked more tired each day, as if he was not sleeping. She began to leave small things for him. A bookmark in a book she thought he might enjoy, fresh flowers on his desk. The curtains opened to let in morning light, small acts of care that she hoped might bring him some comfort. One evening, she was working late when the Duke entered unexpectedly. She started to leave, but he held up a hand. "Please, do not go," he said. "I will just sit quietly. Pretend I am not here." Eleanor returned to her work, very aware of him sitting in the shadows. She could hear him breathing. She could feel his sadness filling the room like fog. After a while he spoke. "You have made good progress," he said, gesturing to her neat records. "Thank you, Your Grace. The work brings me joy." "Does it?" He sounded surprised. "What brings you joy about it?" Eleanor thought carefully. "Books are like friends," she said. "Each one is a different voice, a different world. When I catalogue them, I am introducing them to people who might need them. Someone sad might find comfort. Someone lonely might find company. It feels important." The Duke was quiet for a long moment. "That is a beautiful way to think about it," he said softly. "My wife would have said something similar." It was the first time he had mentioned his wife to her directly. Eleanor felt honored by the trust. "She must have been a wonderful person, Your Grace." "She was," he said. His voice was rough with emotion. "She was everything good, and I could not save her." Eleanor set down her pen and turned to face him. The Duke sat with his head in his hands, his shoulders bent. He looked broken. "I am sure you did everything possible, Your Grace," she said gently. "It was not enough. Nothing I did was enough." He looked up at her with anguish in his dark eyes. "Do you know what it is like to watch someone you love slip away and be powerless to stop it?" "I watched my mother die of consumption when I was 16, Eleanor said quietly. "I sat beside her bed every night. I held her hand. I prayed until I had no prayers left, and she died anyway. So yes, Your Grace, I know what it feels like." The Duke stared at her as if truly seeing her for the first time. "I am sorry," he said. "I have been selfish in my grief. I forget that others suffer too. Grief is not selfish, Your Grace. It is love with nowhere to go." Her words hung in the air between them. The Duke's eyes filled with tears he did not let fall. Eleanor felt her own throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered, "for understanding." From that night something changed between them. The Duke came to the library more often. He would sit and read while Eleanor worked. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, but the silence felt different now. It felt less lonely. Eleanor learned about his childhood, his love of horses, his responsibilities as Duke. She learned that he wrote poetry, but never showed anyone. She learned that he still talked to his wife's portrait when he felt lost. The Duke learned about Eleanor's mother and her cruel stepfamily. He learned that she had been engaged once at 19, but her fiancé had broken it off when her father's debts were revealed. He learned that she loved wildflowers and old legends and the smell of rain. They became friends, though neither would have named it that. They became two lonely people who had found unexpected comfort in each other's presence. Spring came to London. The gardens behind Ashworth House bloomed with flowers the late Duchess had planted. Eleanor sometimes walked there in the early morning before beginning her work. One morning she found the Duke standing among the roses, looking lost. She almost retreated, but he had seen her. "My wife planted these," he said. "Every spring they bloom, and every spring I remember her kneeling here with dirt on her hands, laughing." Eleanor moved to stand beside him. The roses were beautiful, red and pink and white. The morning air smelled sweet. "She left you something beautiful," Eleanor said softly. "Something that grows and continues. That is a gift. Your Grace." "Alexander," he said suddenly. "When we are alone, call me Alexander. I am tired of walls between people." Eleanor's heart skipped. "Then you must call me Eleanor," she said. He smiled. It was small and sad, but it was real. It transformed his face, showing the handsome man beneath the grief. Eleanor felt something flutter in her chest that scared her. "Eleanor," he said, testing her name. "It suits you. It sounds like poetry." They walked through the garden together as the sun rose higher. Alexander told her about Margaret, about their childhood friendship and gentle marriage. His voice was full of love and loss. Eleanor listened and ached for him. She ached for the man who loved so deeply that losing love destroyed him. She ached for the boy who had grown into a duke, but still grieved like a heartbroken child. She also felt something else growing inside her, something warm and terrifying. She was beginning to care for him, not as an employer or even a friend. She was beginning to care in a way that could break her heart, but she pushed the feeling down. Alexander had loved and lost. He had promised his dying wife he would never love again. Eleanor was his employee, his librarian, his friend at best. That would have to be enough. Spring turned to early summer. Alexander found himself thinking about Eleanor at odd moments. He would be reviewing estate accounts and remember something she had said about books. He would be eating dinner and wonder if she was enjoying hers in the servants' hall. He realized he was watching for her in the mornings. He realized he found excuses to visit the library. He realized that the emptiness inside him felt less vast when she was near. This realization terrified him. He had promised Margaret. He had promised to never love another. But what he felt for Eleanor was beginning to feel dangerously like love. He tried to stay away from the library. He spent 3 days avoiding her, but the house felt empty without her quiet presence. The library felt dead without her gentle movements among the books. On the 4th day, he could not stand it anymore. He went to the library at midnight when he thought she would be asleep in her room. He just wanted to sit in the space she had made warm and alive again. But when he opened the door, she was there. Eleanor sat curled in the chair by the fire with a book in her lap. She wore a simple nightgown and wrapper. Her brown hair was loose around her shoulders. She looked up at him with startled eyes. "Alexander," she said, "I am sorry. I could not sleep. I thought you would not mind if I read here." He stood frozen in the doorway. In the firelight, she was beautiful. How had he not seen it before? Her eyes were like warm honey. Her face was gentle and kind. Her loose hair caught the light like silk. "You are not plain," he said without thinking. "You were never plain. How did I not see it?" Eleanor set down her book with shaking hands. "Your Grace, Alexander, I should go." "No." He moved into the room and closed the door behind him. "Please stay. I need to say something." Eleanor stood, wrapping her arms around herself. She looked frightened and hopeful, and confused all at once. Alexander's heart pounded. "I tried to stay away from you," he said. "I tried to keep my distance. I promised Margaret I would never love again." Eleanor's face fell. "I understand, Your Grace." "No, let me finish." He moved closer. "I promised I would never love again. But Eleanor, I think I am breaking that promise. I think I have been breaking it for weeks now." Eleanor's eyes widened. "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I think about you constantly. I am saying that your presence makes this empty house feel like a home again. I am saying that you have brought light back into my darkness, and I did not even realize how much darkness I had been living in until you came." Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks. "You cannot mean this. I am nobody. I am plain and poor and ordinary." "You are extraordinary," Alexander said fiercely. "You are kind and intelligent and brave. You survived cruelty without becoming cruel yourself. You found joy in books and beauty in gardens and hope in darkness. You are the strongest person I have ever met." He took her hands in his. They were small and cold and trembling. He wanted to warm them. He wanted to protect her from ever being cold or frightened again. "I do not expect you to feel the same," he said. "You came here as my employee. I have no right to burden you with my feelings, but I had to tell you the truth. I am falling in love with you, Eleanor Westbrook. Maybe I have been falling since the first day you walked into this library." Eleanor looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "You are not burdening me," she whispered. "Alexander, I have been falling in love with you too. I tried not to. I tried to just be grateful for this position and not want more. But every day I spent near you made it harder. Every conversation made me care more. I am in love with you." Alexander felt something crack open in his chest. 3 years of ice began to melt. 3 years of grief began to ease. He pulled Eleanor into his arms and held her like she was precious. She wrapped her arms around him and clung to him. "I am afraid," he whispered into her hair. "I am afraid of loving again and losing again." "I am afraid too," Eleanor said against his chest. "I am afraid this is a dream. I am afraid I will wake up back in my attic room." He pulled back to look at her face. He cupped her cheek in his hand and wiped away her tears with his thumb. "This is real," he said. "You are real. What I feel is real." Then he kissed her. It was gentle and sweet and full of emotion. Eleanor's hands came up to his hair. Alexander's arms tightened around her. The kiss deepened, and they poured 3 years of loneliness and 10 years of heartache into it. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Alexander rested his forehead against Eleanor's and smiled, really smiled. For the first time in 3 years, he felt truly alive. "What do we do now?" Eleanor asked. "Now I court you properly," Alexander said. "I take you riding in the park. I buy you beautiful dresses. I introduce you to society as the woman I intend to marry. If you will have me, Eleanor, if you will take a broken man and help him become whole again." "You are not broken," Eleanor said firmly. "You are healing. And yes, Alexander, yes to all of it." They stood in the library, holding each other as the fire burned low. Outside, the city slept. Inside, two lonely hearts had finally found home. But their happiness would not be easily won. The next morning, Lady Cordelia arrived at Ashworth House uninvited. She swept past Harrison and demanded to see the Duke. Alexander came down to find her in his drawing room, looking furious. Eleanor stood behind him, pale but determined. "Your Grace," Cordelia said coldly, "I have heard disturbing rumors. People are saying you have been seen with my stepdaughter. People are saying you show her favor. People are correct." Alexander said calmly, "I intend to marry Miss Westbrook." Cordelia laughed harshly. "Marry her? You cannot be serious. She is nobody. She has no dowry, no family, no connections. She will make you a laughingstock. She has everything that matters." Alexander said. His voice was ice. "She has kindness, intelligence, and strength. She has survived your cruelty with grace. She is worth 10 of you, Lady Bramwell." "This is madness," Cordelia snapped. "I will not allow it. I will tell everyone how she tricked you, how she seduced you for your money. I will destroy what little reputation she has left." Eleanor stepped forward. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "You have no power over me anymore, Lady Bramwell. You cannot hurt me with words. You cannot make me small. The Duke sees my worth, and that is enough." Cordelia's face twisted with rage. "You ungrateful girl, after all I did for you, you will regret this." "The only thing I regret," Eleanor said, "is wasting 10 years trying to earn love from someone incapable of giving it. I am done, Lady Bramwell. I am done being your victim." "Get out of my house," Alexander said coldly, "and do not return. If you spread lies about Eleanor, I will use every bit of my power and influence to destroy you socially. A duke's word carries weight. Lady Bramwell, remember that." Cordelia left in a fury. After she was gone, Eleanor collapsed into a chair, shaking. Alexander knelt beside her and took her hands. "I am sorry," he said. "I brought trouble to you." "No," Eleanor said. "You brought me freedom." I stood up to her. Alexander, I finally stood up to her. I have never felt so strong. He pulled her into his arms. "You are the strongest person I know," he said. But Cordelia kept her threat. Within days, London society buzzed with gossip. The Duke of Ashworth and his librarian, a fortune hunter who had trapped a grieving widower, scandalous, inappropriate, disgraceful. Alexander ignored it all. He took Eleanor riding in Hyde Park, where everyone could see them. He bought her a wardrobe of beautiful gowns. He introduced her to his mother, who took one look at Eleanor's kind face and welcomed her with open arms. "She has brought you back to life," his mother said, tears in her eyes. "She has given me back my son. I love her already." But the gossip wore on Eleanor. She was not used to society's attention. She hated hearing herself called names. She hated that Alexander's reputation was suffering because of her. "Maybe I should leave," she said one evening. They were in the library, their place of peace. "Maybe if I left, the gossip would stop." "No," Alexander said fiercely. He pulled her into his arms. "I will not lose you. I cannot lose you. You are the best thing that has happened to me in years. Let them talk. Let them gossip. I do not care." But Alexander, "No, listen to me, Eleanor. I spent 3 years dead inside, 3 years going through motions without living. You brought me back. You made me want to wake up in the morning. You made me laugh again. You made me feel again. Do you think I care what small-minded people say about that?" Eleanor buried her face in his chest. "I love you," she whispered. "And I love you," he said, "more than I thought possible, more than I knew I could love again. You taught me that the heart can heal. You taught me that loving again does not mean forgetting what came before. Margaret would have loved you, Eleanor. She would have been happy for us." He tipped her face up and kissed her deeply. Eleanor melted into him. Nothing else mattered when he held her like this. Not gossip, not society, not the past. "Marry me," Alexander said against her lips. "Marry me tomorrow. Marry me today. I do not want to wait." "Yes," Eleanor breathed. "Yes, Alexander, I will marry you." They were wed 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at his country estate. Only close friends and family attended. Alexander's mother cried happy tears. His friends looked shocked to see him smiling. Eleanor wore a dress of cream silk and looked more beautiful than she had ever imagined possible. When Alexander slid the ring onto her finger, Eleanor thought her heart would burst. She was loved. She was chosen. She was home. "I love you, Duchess," Alexander whispered as they were pronounced man and wife. "I love you, Alexander," Eleanor whispered back. They spent their honeymoon at his country estate in Cornwall. The house sat on cliffs, overlooking the sea. They walked the beaches and explored the gardens and spent long evenings in the library reading to each other. Alexander taught Eleanor to ride horses. Eleanor taught Alexander to laugh freely again. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. They learned each other's bodies and souls with equal tenderness. One night, lying in bed with Eleanor in his arms, Alexander said, "I thought my life was over when Margaret died. I thought I would never be happy again." Eleanor traced patterns on his chest. "What do you think now?" "I think life is full of surprises. I think the heart is bigger than we know. I think loving you does not erase Margaret. It just means my heart found room to love again. Is that wrong?" "No," Eleanor said firmly. "That is beautiful. Love is not finite, Alexander. Love grows. Your love for Margaret will always be part of you. And now your love for me can live there too." He kissed her forehead. "How did you become so wise?" "I learned from suffering," she said simply. "Suffering teaches us what matters." They returned to London in the autumn. Society had moved on to new gossip. Some people still whispered, but most had accepted that the Duke of Ashworth had found love again, and when they saw how happy he was, how Eleanor glowed, they could not help but feel happy for them too. Eleanor transformed Ashworth House. She filled it with flowers and light and laughter. She opened the windows that had been closed for years. She invited people for dinners and parties. She brought life back to rooms that had been silent too long. Alexander watched her bloom with pride and love. The sad, frightened woman he had hired as a librarian had become a confident, graceful duchess, but she was still his Eleanor. Still kind, still gentle, still the person who saw beauty in books and hope in darkness. One evening, a year after their wedding, they sat in the library together. Eleanor worked on her ongoing catalogue while Alexander read poetry. The fire crackled. Rain fell softly outside. Everything was peaceful. "I am happy," Alexander said suddenly. Eleanor looked up from her work. "Good," she said, smiling. "I am happy too." "I mean truly happy," he said. "Not just content or peaceful, actually happy. I did not think I would ever feel this way again." Eleanor set down her pen and came to sit beside him. She took his hand in hers. "You deserve happiness, Alexander. You deserve love and joy and everything good." "So do you," he said. "And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you have it. No one will ever make you feel small or worthless again. I will love you until my last breath. I will cherish you always." "And I will love you," Eleanor said. through every day and every challenge, through joy and sorrow. You are my home, Alexander. You always will be." He kissed her then, deep and sweet and full of promise. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Inside, two people who had been broken by the world had found each other and become whole. Eleanor, Duchess of Ashworth, fell asleep that night in her husband's arms and thought about how far she had come, from an attic room where she cried herself to sleep, from a life of cruelty and loneliness, from believing she was worthless and unlovable. She had entered the Duke's library at midnight and found everything she had been searching for: love, home, belonging, a future bright with possibility. And Alexander, Duke of Ashworth, fell asleep holding the woman who had saved him, who had shown him that the heart can heal, that love can come twice in a lifetime, that promising to never love again was a promise worth breaking. They had found each other in darkness and created light together. They had built a love strong enough to heal old wounds. They had become proof that even the most broken hearts can learn to love again. Years later, Eleanor would think back on that first night in the library, the night she met a sad, lonely duke who could not sleep. The night that changed everything, and she would smile, remembering how fear had turned to friendship, and friendship had turned to love. She would tell their children the story about how their father had promised never to love again until she entered his library at midnight, about how sometimes the best things in life come when we are not looking for them, about how love finds us even when we have given up hope. And Alexander would hold her hand and add, "Your mother saved me. She brought me back to life. She taught me that the heart is braver and stronger than we know." They lived happily ever after, loving each other through every season of life. Their love story became the kind people whispered about with sighs and smiles. The sad duke and the brave librarian, the man who thought he would never love again and the woman who taught him how. It was a love worth waiting for, a love worth fighting for, a love that proved that even in the darkest times, hope and happiness can find us. And they never forgot the gift they had been given. They never took their happiness for granted. Every day they chose each other. Every day they chose love. The end was really a beginning, and it was beautiful. If this story touched your heart, if you felt the pain of loneliness and the joy of finding love, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that their happy ending might be just around the corner. Subscribe to hear more stories of love, hope, and second chances. Remember, it is never too late to find happiness. It is never too late for love to find you. Thank you for listening to Eleanor and Alexander's story. May you find your own beautiful beginning.